Most serial killers are caught through intense and complex investigations from the local police force or sometimes even the FBI, usually involving a combination of crime scene evidence, DNA analysis, and local tips in order to identify a suspect as the killer. In the case of James Dale Ritchie, a serial killer terrorizing Anchorage, Alaska only a few years back in 2016, his downfall was caused by a chance encounter with police as they tried to ask him a quick question on the side of the road regarding a runaway suspect they were trailing. This fated meeting would end in bloodshed and multiple deaths. However, it would end up solving a killing spree that had been stumping Anchorage detectives for months. Today, we're covering the unlikely case of James Dale Ritchie and analyzing his troubling reign of carnage in the land of the midnight sun. James Dale Ritchie was born on November 4, 1976, and seemed to be leading an incredibly promising and fruitful life in the Wonder Park neighborhood of Anchorage, Alaska. During his teenage years, he attended East Anchorage High School, and by every standard was a stellar student. As a teenager, James was standing at a whopping 6 feet and 3 inches, making him a prime athletic material and star of both the basketball and football teams, where he played alongside other athletic students that would eventually turn pro in the form of Trajan Langdon and Mao Tossi. Not only did James excel when it came to sports and athleticism, but he was also a force to be reckoned with when it came to academics, always getting good grades and even scoring 1,200 on his SATs. James also had an enriching social life, especially when it came to his two best friends, Quincy and Bobby Thompson. The three were all very close, with Bobby later recounting that James would stay over at the Thompson house for days, weeks. Whenever James wanted to come over to the house, he came over, and even stating that their mother loved him like another son. With this evident academic and athletic skill, James was recruited to the West Virginia University football team immediately following high school in 1994. But tragically, what should have been a happy send-off to college and a chance at becoming a professional football player was overshadowed by a tragic shooting and killing of Quincy Thompson the day before James left for Virginia. According to Bobby, his contact and friendship with James slowly but surely began to dwindle after James left for college, and with his brother's death to grieve over, Bobby was hard-pressed to chase after a friend who seemingly didn't want anything to do with him. Despite how hard James had worked to achieve his spot on the WVU football team, James dropped out of college just after one semester and returned home to Alaska. Here, his life began a steady downward spiral, with James quickly becoming involved in drug dealing and dogfighting by 1995. Over the course of the next decade, James would be in and out of police custody for a variety of offenses, all of which were drug-related. In 2005, he was arrested for an attempted home invasion, where he broke into someone's home with some plastic handcuffs and 2 handguns. However, he was thankfully caught and arrested before he could carry out his currently still unknown plan. James was released from prison in 2007, after which he purchased a Colt Python revolver, one that Anchorage authorities would later become very familiar with, and left it for safekeeping with a friend while James moved down to Broadway, Virginia to be with his parents. James stayed in Virginia for quite some time, but had next to no run-ins with the law, and was looking to be an example of how criminals can be rehabilitated and go on to lead promising lives. Unfortunately, that would not last much longer. Spurred on by a breakup with his girlfriend, James moved back to his hometown of Anchorage in March of 2016, and reacquired the revolver he had left with a friend before moving to Airport Heights, demonstrating a level of self-awareness likely gained during his peaceful years in Virginia. James could likely sense himself slipping back into his darker criminal headspace and reached out for professional mental help. According to the police, it's unknown the type of help he received, how far the treatment went, or whether or not he was ever diagnosed with any actual disorder. On July 3, 2016, just 5 months after moving back from Virginia, James shot and killed 20-year-old Brianna Foisey and 41-year-old Jason Netter Sr. early in the morning, leaving without taking much time to cover his tracks. The bodies were discovered near a Ship Creek bike path by a cyclist just before 8 a.m. Both Brianna and Jason led troubled, drug-filled lives, with Brianna suffering homelessness due to her substance abuse, and Jason struggling to pay child support or help at all in his 2 daughters' lives due to his addictions. The police were quickly called to the scene and ruled the deaths a double homicide. On July 5th, the given drug connection between the 2 victims, the police understandably assumed the murders had to do with some kind of drug transaction. The police released the information they could and asked for help from the public identifying 2 men who would have been near the area at the time of the murders. However, the trail soon went cold after this. Less than a month later, on July 29th, James shot 21-year-old Trevion Kindle Thompson numerous times, killing him as he rode his bike home from a late-night shift at work. Shortly before the murder, James had been spotted through a nearby window by 3 girls who later heard the repeated gunshots and witnessed James picking up Trevion's bike and riding it away from the scene. The girls called the police, who quickly arrived, finding Trevion barely holding on to life. However, he would succumb to his injuries not long after and die at the scene of the crime while in police care. Police were able to determine that Brianna and Jason were killed using the same gun that shot and killed Trevion. However, this raised more questions than it answered. It was assumed that Brianna and Jason were murdered in conjunction with some sort of drug-related incident. However, Trevion was a hard-working and honest man with no connection to Anchorage's drug scene. With eyewitness accounts from the 3 girls that had called police, detectives were able to get a sketch of Trevion's killer and reached out to the public, which was done well enough to heavily resemble James. In a twisted turn of fate, Trevion's father was Bobby Thompson, who would later be shocked to learn that the identity of his son's killer was a man he once considered a brother. It's currently unknown for sure whether or not James knew Trevion's identity when he killed him. However, it's unlikely that he would have recognized him after losing contact with Bobby all those years ago. It's also fairly unlikely that knowing his victim's identity would have stopped the vicious killer that was James Dale Ritchie. During the morning of August 28, 2016, James would strike once again, this time killing 34-year-old Kevin Turner and 25-year-old Bree DeHusson in Valley of the Moon Park. Police were called to the scene by a woman walking through the park that found Kevin's body under a pavilion, evidently full of bullet wounds. While investigating Kevin's body, the police also discovered Bree's bullet-laden body and were able to determine that not only were both victims killed by the same gun, but that they were killed by the same Colt Python that was responsible for Brianna, Jason, and Trevion. Realizing that they had a serial killer on their hands, the Anchorage Police Department put out a warning advising against any citizens walking along park trails after dark or early in the morning, while the FBI even put out a $10,000 reward for any information that led to the killer's arrest. Anchorage lived in fear of their gun-toting serial killer for another 3 months, with no sign of his reign of terror ending anytime soon, until a fateful encounter on November 12th. The Anchorage police received a phone call around 4 in the morning on November 12, 2016. Reporting that an unknown man had ordered a taxi but refused to pay his cab fare after arriving at his destination and made a break for it by jumping out of the taxi. Armed with a description of the man, 2 officers drove throughout the late-night streets of Anchorage in hopes of finding the man. The following events were all captured on dashcam of Officer Saleo's cruiser and were later released in part to the public. While driving, Officer Saleo noticed a tall man walking alone down the street and attempted to pull up next to him and question him about the runaway suspect. However, the man completely ignored Saleo and kept walking. Saleo then turned on his lights and yelled out the window to the man and ordered him to stop, but was once again completely ignored. Determined to find out what was going on, Officer Saleo then followed the man across the street, pulled onto the curb, and used a megaphone to the man. Finally able to capture the man's attention, he turns around and shows his face, revealing himself to the officer, who is unaware that he's staring down James Dale Ritchie, who's out looking for blood. It's at this point that the chilling dashcam footage cuts off, as James then whipped out his Colt Python revolver and opened fire on the officer. Officer Saleo was shot at least 6 times and sustained major injuries to his bones, liver, and intestines. However, he miraculously was able to jump out of his vehicle and shoot back at James. Another nearby officer, Sergeant Patsky, witnessed this event and assisted Officer Saleo in taking down James. While Officer Saleo was rushed to the hospital where he eventually made a full recovery, however, James Dale Ritchie was killed in the shootout, succumbing to extensive bullet wounds, the same way he had taken out each of his victims. After his death, James's gun was then sent to a forensic lab where it was tied to the murders of Brianna Foisey, James Nutter Sr., Trevion Kendall Thompson, Kevin Turner, and Brianna Husson. The police continued to investigate the case, and around 3 days after the shootout between James and the officers, it was publicly announced that James Dale Ritchie was the serial shooter that had been haunting the local walking and bike trails, and the citizens of Anchorage were able to breathe a little easier. However, with James being dead, the police were obviously unable to decipher any possible motive or reasoning for James's killing spree, or the reason why he may have turned away from what looked to be a promising and shining future in order to turn to drug dealing and murder, and it's highly unlikely that we'll ever have a real answer. Leave your thoughts on the case in the comment section down below and let us know any other case you would like us to cover in the future. If you enjoyed the video, consider hitting that like button, subscribing, and turning on notifications so that you never miss when we post another video just like this, and we'll see you in the next one.